potentially abroad. As we await that news conference, I want to bring our senior White House correspondent, John King, back in. We do have another story we're following right now in New York City, John. A postal union has filed an environmental lawsuit to force the closing of New York's biggest mail sorting center. The lawsuit comes as the Postal Service announced that absenteeism at the mail sorting center has climbed to nearly 30% since traces of anthrax were found on 4 mail sorting machines. Clearly a lot of concern among postal workers in New York City. Also a similar suit being filed in New Jersey as well. John, as we await the news conference from the Attorney General over at the Justice Department, officials of the White House obviously had to approve the Attorney General's decision to go forth and make this announcement, didn't they?
We were told, yes, they did, Wolf, and we were told that decision was made this afternoon. Again, once the President and his top advisors were briefed on this new intelligence information, senior administration officials telling us that it is viewed as both timely and credible intelligence data from a number of sources of a credible but not specific threat of terrorist strikes here in the United States or against U.S. interests overseas. The President, you're right, did have to approve the Attorney General's decision to put law enforcement agencies in this country on an even higher state of alert, already on a considerably high state of alert in the wake of the September 11th strikes on the United States. Also a difficult decision over just how to make that alert. Do you, as the FBI has done in the past, just put out a piece of paper, send it around the country to law enforcement agencies, or do you take the extraordinary measure that we will see in just a few minutes of the United States Attorney General making a public announcement of this new threat? The administration saying Mr. Ashcroft wanted to make it directly to the American people, and we know as he prepares to speak out publicly, a number of senior administration officials making calls behind the scenes, the Chief of Staff Andy Card calling key members of Congress, the Homeland Security Director, former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge calling his former colleagues, governors around the country, asking them to put state and local law enforcement agencies as well as emergency preparedness teams on a higher state of alert. So the administration kicking the new Homeland Security apparatus into gear, if you will, and we will hear, we're told, not too many specifics from the Attorney General, but that he will say he decided it was necessary to make a public announcement because of credible, timely intelligence data suggesting the high possibility of new wave of terrorist strikes on targets here in the United States.
All right, John, stand by. We're looking at a live picture of that room where the news conference from with the Attorney General is about to take place. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on this breaking story, a new terror threat facing the United States. Stay with us. Ashcroft will walk into this room, a picture of which you're now seeing, and he will make an announcement of an alert, a new terrorist alert facing U.S. interests in the United States, potentially around the world. We don't have specific details. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, has been reporting on this. We want to go back to John in a moment, but I also want to alert our viewers as we await the start of this news conference, 2 developments in New Jersey. We have now learned from state officials in New Jersey that a New Jersey woman who is not employed by the Postal Service, is not a media employee, does not work for any of the news media organizations, did come down with cutaneous or skin anthrax. She's doing just fine, we are told, but apparently this may be the first person who was not directly associated with either the news media or the Postal Service in New York or New Jersey, who's come down with the less serious form of anthrax, the skin or cutaneous anthrax. At the same time, we are also hearing in Hamilton Township, New Jersey, another postal worker has come down with the more serious anthrax, the inhaled anthrax. We're getting details on both of these developments.
This is peer-reviewed, and that's the purpose for the day or 2 peer review period.
Doctor, could you take a moment and just run us through what exactly will happen, how it'll work? What, will they shut down the building, seal it off, or what?
Who wants to do it?
Paul, do you want to handle
Okay.
it? Yeah.
Was your question that... My name is Dr. Paul Shawties. It's spelled S-C-H-A-U-D-I-E-S.
You didn't like the way I pronounced it, huh?
It was excellent, sir. I-E-S.
Could you just run through the actual process, what will happen?
Initially, what will happen is that we will seal the building. We will seal the building off from the inside in areas where there is no known contamination, and from the outside in areas of known contamination. We will then generate the chlorine dioxide on site. It's not the type of a gas that you can generate and then bring in. You generate it on site. We will bring air out of the building through our chlorine dioxide generation system and back into the building to negate the effect, to negate getting a positive pressure, and that would exacerbate leaks. We don't want to do that. We won't do that. We will use the existing HVAC system within the building to move the air around. That will be supplemented by fans. We will prop open areas that are not normally supplied by the HVAC, such as fire escapes, for obvious reasons. We will be able to have individuals go into the building to measure and verify and validate the levels of chlorine dioxide in different regions of the building. We are going to put spore strips with Bacillus subtilis strain Niger and in various locations within the building, areas that are known to be contaminated as well as areas that are known not to be contaminated, in order to validate the kill, in order to show that we were able to in fact do what we want to do. In addition, we will go in and swipe from areas of known contamination to demonstrate two things. Because the chlorine dioxide reacts with the proteins. It'll take that spore that's now a hard ball and essentially make a wiffle ball out of it. So it can no longer germinate. But we want to be able to demonstrate that we have the DNA from that organism, which indicates that we have removed where it was live, and demonstrate that it does not grow. But it's hard to quantify that because you don't know how many organisms you really have wiped up when you're wiping up pieces. So that's why we're going to have the validation strips.
Doctor, it's necessary that it sounds like you're saying, to insert some new anthrax into the building.
No. It is Bacillus subtilis strain Niger, also known as Bacillus colbigii. It is a simulant. It is not harmful. And it will actually be in little sealed envelopes. So we are not introducing anything harmful into the building.
Why is it necessary to do that? Is it difficult to test for the absence of anthrax, or more difficult?
Proving a negative is very, very difficult. And what we want to do, our target is what's called a 6-log kill. That's 99.9999% efficiency. So if you start off with 1 million organisms, you end up with 0. Our test will be able to test up to an 8-log kill.
Has this method of remediation been used before?
I was going to say the other way that we are going to ensure that we have remediated the building sufficiently is there's 2 ways to run tests after we have done the remediation. One test lets you know whether or not there are still viable spores. So we want to ensure that we have no germination. The other test lets you know that there are remnant pieces of the DNA from the spores that were there. So that tells us, yes, they were there, and now they are no longer viable. We have killed them. So that proof right there makes us feel comfortable that we've remediated the building sufficiently.
So is this a reliable method of remediation? Has it been used before?
Yes.
On anthrax?
There are laboratory tests that are ongoing this week with the Bacillus anthracis. We have called colleagues at the U.S. Department of Agriculture who have said they have used the chlorine dioxide on Bacillus subtilis strain Niger, which in their opinion is a tougher nut to crack than the Bacillus anthracis, and they say it works very well.
How much gas will you need to be able to remediate that building?
We have, those calculations are being worked. I don't have those numbers right in my head. We have data that we get a 6-log kill with a 4,000 ppm over a 1-hour period. And with this gas, that's the same as a 1,000 ppm over 4 hours. And so the approach that we're going to take is going to be 200 ppm over 24 hours, which gives you a 4,800 ppm hour. In order to...
Have you got all that?
Now, the Schrödinger wave equation, we'll go from there.
All right, we're going to go from Capitol Hill to the Justice Department. We just heard some details how they plan on cleaning up the Senate Hart office building, which of course did find several traces of anthrax. Officials of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, saying they plan on using a chemical chlorine dioxide gas to go ahead and seal off most of that building, the parts that have been contaminated, and then to clean it up. They say the building will reopen on Tuesday, November 13th. John King, our senior White House correspondent, is over at the White House. He broke the story about the announcement that the Attorney General is about to make. We're literally a minute or two away from that announcement. John, just recap as we go into this news conference, the headline.
Several senior administration sources telling us, Wolf, the United States government has new, credible, and timely intelligence information raising the possibility, some would say a high possibility, of new terrorist strikes in the United States. So the Attorney General of the United States wanted to come out in public and issue a new alert to the American people. Here he is with the FBI Director, Bob Mueller.
Good afternoon. The administration has concluded, based on information developed, that there may be additional terrorist attacks within the United States and against United States interests over the next week. The administration views this information as credible, but unfortunately it does not contain specific information as to the type of attack or specific targets. Consequently, a terrorist threat advisory update has been issued to 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country through the National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, known as NLETS. We have notified law enforcement to continue on highest alert and to notify immediately the FBI of any unusual or suspicious activity. We ask for the patience and cooperation of the American people if and when they encounter additional measures undertaken by local law enforcement or federal law enforcement authorities and others who are charged with securing the safety of the public. As always, we urge Americans in the course of their normal activities to remain alert and to report unusual circumstances or inappropriate behavior to the proper authorities. Additional security alerts and security measures have been or are being taken by a number of governmental agencies, including the INS, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, among the departments who have been notified of the alert. Governor Ridge has also discussed this heightened state of security with the governors, who were asked to take appropriate precautions based upon security assessments in their respective states.
Mr. Director. Thank you. Good afternoon. On every occasion when the government has received credible information, we have chosen to warn our colleagues in the law enforcement community. And we are doing so again today because we have such information, even though it is not specific as to intended target or as to intended method. Now, I should add that I have just come from addressing the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, and I know how difficult it is for the officers they represent and all other state and local officers out there to respond without greater detail. Even given that, I believe it is advisable to alert law enforcement and local authorities as to what knowledge we have received. We are again asking them, and through them local communities, to remain extremely vigilant. Doing so gives us a force multiplier that could well prevent another terrorist attack. And we appreciate their willingness, however difficult, to join in this national effort. Thank you.
Director?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you consider that the earlier threat advisory you put out October 11th helped to avert such an attack?
It is very difficult to tell, but it may well have helped to avert such an attack.
Mr. Director, can you give us a sense of whether this is electronic information or from a human source?
I cannot get into the source of the information for obvious, I think, reasons.
Director, what realistically should Americans do with this information? You never rescinded the last one, and my presumption is that most Americans already are on a heightened state of alert.
I think that is true. However, when we have received this additional information, specific as to time, but not specific as to other details, we think it is important to put it out there so chiefs of police, other law enforcement entities can again refocus their efforts on potential targets in their communities.
May I just make a comment there? We have decided to share with the American people that we have alerted law enforcement. And that's important. Because we are alerting law enforcement and conferring with them, we think this gives people a basis for continuing to live their lives the way they would otherwise live them, with this elevated sense of alertness or vigilance. I trust the American people to be able to understand, in this context of conflict, where there is a front overseas and there is another front here in the United States, that they can make good judgments and can understand this kind of information. And we are sharing it exactly in the context that the director has indicated. It is not specific, but it is information that we think the American people have the good mature judgment and capacity to accommodate and to understand. And it's with that in mind that we are speaking to them about a notice that we are providing to law enforcement.
General, did you brief the President about the warning, and did he agree with the release of this warning to the people?
The President is aware of this situation, was made aware of the situation early in the day.
Do you have concerns that if you issue these alerts and nothing happens, people may not take them seriously the next time?
You know, if people take these warnings seriously, they go about their lives, but they participate with patience in the additional steps that are taken by law enforcement authorities, they are very likely participating in the prevention of terrorism and in the disruption of terrorism. There is no reason for a success on the part of the American people in forestalling or otherwise delaying or interrupting terrorism for that to lull them into a false sense of indifference. It's important for the American people to understand that these are to be taken seriously, but by taking them seriously on a continuing basis, we can have the good outcome of avoiding very serious additional terrorist problems. Yes, sir.
Mr. Director, you said the other day that the earlier warning could have been conceivably related to the anthrax attacks. Do you think that this warning could in some way relate to anthrax intelligence?
I would be speculating if that were on that issue. I have no reason to believe at this point in time that it is related.
Do you have reason to believe that this is a more credible threat than the last threat that you
I think we clearly stated we believe this threat to be credible, and for that reason it should be taken seriously. Thank you.
The Attorney General of the United States and the FBI Director announcing that there is a new threat, a new terrorist threat facing the United States, U.S. interests here in the United States as well as U.S. interests around the world. The Attorney General saying it's a credible threat, although he does not have specifics. The FBI Director saying that this credible information, once again, no information about intended target or intended method. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, about an hour or so ago broke this story. He's still on the north lawn of the White House. John, when you heard the Attorney General and the FBI Director walk this very tightrope, on the one hand, alerting law enforcement authorities around the United States, as well as the American public, of this threat, knowing at the same time it would heighten concern, perhaps even panic for some Americans. It's a difficult tightrope to walk.
Very difficult and indeed very delicate. Wolf, you heard the Attorney General himself say that they believe this information to be credible and therefore they had a responsibility to share it, not only with 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country, but the Attorney General saying that the American people might encounter additional security precautions, perhaps even some hassle, if you will, in their day-to-day lives because of added precautions taken by state and local law enforcement officials as a result of this. The Attorney General saying he thought the American people deserved to know why. As you noted, they say this information is credible, not specific as to target or method, but they say they decided to make this public announcement because of the immediacy of the threat, that they believe there was a high possibility of additional terrorist attacks here in the United States or on U.S. interest overseas in the period of the next few days. Now, the FBI Director, Bob Mueller, refusing to discuss sources in any way, but we do know that there is an unprecedented international intelligence operation and law enforcement operation underway, not only here in the United States, but through the Pakistani intelligence service. The Russians are cooperating. The United States working with friendly governments like Germany, where the hijack plot of September 11th is believed to have been hatched. And we have been told by sources in the past 3 weeks that they are monitoring conversations and activities of people believed to be associated with the bin Laden network and other terrorist networks. So we do know of this unprecedented effort here in the United States and overseas to track suspected terrorists. The Attorney General and the FBI Director obviously not willing to discuss any sources in public because of their hope that these sources could prove fruitful here in the immediate and also in the future.
John King at the White House, thanks for that good reporting. I'll be back in 1 hour with much more coverage on all of this as well as the war on terrorism. We'll also be back here in the CNN War Room with 3 experts to assess the progress on the war on terror. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. Lou Dobbs' Moneyline begins right now.
This is Moneyline for Monday, October 29th.
Good evening. As you've just heard, Attorney General John Ashcroft saying the government has credible information of a possible terrorist attack on U.S. targets within the next week. The Attorney General says U.S. officials do not know where that attack might happen. We'll go live to the White House in just a moment. Anthrax today discovered at additional government agencies in the nation's capital. Anthrax causing the Supreme Court justices to convene outside their courtroom for the first time in more than 65 years. U.S. jets today targeting Taliban troops facing off against opposition forces near the capital of Kabul. Boeing stock today plunged after losing a gargantuan contract to Lockheed Martin Friday, and chip stocks pushing the NASDAQ lower after Intel cut chip prices. And a deal that would make EchoStar Communications the nation's leading home satellite television service provider is met by skepticism today on Wall Street. In the war against terrorism, Taliban fighters are being attacked from the air and the ground tonight. U.S. jets dropping bombs from the skies while Northern Alliance forces are exchanging heavy fire across enemy lines. The Pentagon today said the Taliban and al-Qaeda network are responsible for any civilian casualties in Afghanistan.
Responsibility for every single casualty in this war, be they innocent Afghans or innocent Americans, rests at the feet of Taliban and al-Qaeda. Their leaderships are the ones that are hiding in mosques and using Afghan civilians as human shields by placing their armor and artillery in close proximity to civilians, schools, hospitals, and the like.
The Defense Secretary says a number of al-Qaeda and Taliban soldiers, including their leaders, have been killed in those bombing raids. In New York City today, a U.S. House Intelligence Subcommittee heard testimony on terrorism and homeland defense. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani among a number of New York officials who testified, the mayor calling for greater information sharing between the FBI and state and local authorities. Attorney General John Ashcroft, as we reported, has issued a new alert to all Americans concerning the possibility of a terrorist attack within the nation's borders within the next week. John King, who broke the story earlier, joins us now from the White House with the latest. John?
Lou, that dramatic announcement from the Attorney General and the FBI Director just moments ago, based on what John Ashcroft says is new and credible information, intelligence data, raising the possibility of terrorist strikes here in the United States or against U.S. interests overseas. Again, as you noted, the information not specific as to the target or to the method of those possible attacks, but Mr. Ashcroft saying he decided it was urgent to make that public after notifying 18,000 law enforcement agencies around the country. That work went on behind the scenes this afternoon. Then Mr. Ashcroft came into the briefing room at the Justice Department to make his public announcement.
The administration has concluded, based on information developed, that there may be additional terrorist attacks within the United States and against United States interests over the next week.
The Attorney General saying he decided to go public with this because the American people might encounter more security precautions as they go about their daily business from state and local law enforcement officials. Mr. Ashcroft also saying, as the President did earlier in the day, that individual Americans might be able to break up terrorist activities by noting any suspicious activity around them. And as the Attorney General made that announcement in public, Lou, we know the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, calling key members of Congress, Tom Ridge, the new Director of Homeland Security here at the White House, calling governors around the country, asking them to do all they can to raise the alert status, already quite high, of state and local law enforcement officials as well. Lou?
John, I know the Attorney General would not respond to the difference in the credibility of these two alerts. This is the second alert after the previous alert in which the cases of anthrax attacks followed. But this seems a bit peculiar to issue an alert without a credible threat, a sense of approach on the part of the terrorists, timing or place. What is going on here?
Well, we were told in advance of this announcement when we first reported this development, several senior administration officials telling us, yes, the information was not specific as to a time or a method of an attack, but they believed, and it was corroborated by other sources, that it was credible. U.S. officials deciding that they had a responsibility to put it before the public. Even as you noted, it could cause some jitters, but we do know there is an unprecedented surveillance operation going on around the world. U.S. and other intelligence services monitoring the bin Laden network. One senior administration official I talked to before this announcement was made said it was a tough call, but the President believed it was the right call because they view this information to be both credible and timely.
Okay, John, thank you very much. John King from the White House. Well, 2 new cases of anthrax confirmed this evening. A 51-year-old New Jersey woman who lives near the Hamilton Township mail facility tested positive for skin anthrax. And a second postal worker at the Hamilton Mail Center has now been confirmed to have inhaled anthrax. In Washington, traces of the bacteria were discovered in the mailroom of the Supreme Court building, but weekend tests showed the rest of that building to be clear. The 9 justices were forced to convene outside the High Court for the first time since 1935. Small amounts of anthrax were also found in mailrooms at the State Department headquarters and a mail pouch bound for the U.S. Embassy in Peru. Last Thursday, a State Department mail handler was diagnosed with inhalation anthrax. The president is vowing to tighten immigration policy to stop terrorists from entering the United States. New steps include checking to make certain people entering the United States on student visas actually attend school. Many of the 19 terrorist hijackers on September 11th were in the United States on visas typically given only to students. Firefighters who were on the scene right after the World Trade Center collapsed are now being checked for respiratory problems. Then, after a growing number of New York firefighters contracted what's being called a World Trade Center cough. For more on this, we're joined now by Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Doctor, good to have you with us.
Good evening, Lou.
The screening is taking place. Do we have any evidence of what might be the problem?
Well, what we're talking about, Lou, is the evidence of smoke injury as well as small particle disease injury on the lungs. Certainly we saw large plumes of smoke, hard to forget those. Combined in that smoke were small particles that actually can get into the lungs, get to the very base of the lungs, and sometimes cause difficulty with getting oxygen from the lungs into the blood. That's the difficulty here, Lou. I talked to the doctor, the chief lung doctor for the New York Fire Department. He said up to 40%, about 4,000 people are having chronic cough, but cough so severe that it's requiring steroid inhalants. The concern is that sometimes that can go on to become asthma, sometimes it can go on to become emphysema, pulmonary disease, things like that. So far, only 370 have been screened. Lou, they're going to screen close to 11,000 over the next 60 days, about 170 or so a day.
Doctor, there's no issue here of concern about some sort of biochemical weapon being involved there.
That's correct. There is not a concern. The EPA has monitored the air consistently throughout that time. People also talk about asbestos, Lou. That was also checked and also found to be very, very low in concentration.
Now, the important question is what can be done for these firefighters and the policemen who were there, and is anyone who was near there in the days following, in point of fact, the weeks following those, the dust and the air were just filled with debris. What can be done for these people?
Well, the big goal here, Lou, and a lot of those folks have inflammation of their airways because of the irritation of the smoke and the small particles. The real key is to try and decrease the inflammation. That's where steroids come into play. If you can decrease the inflammation early on, sometimes you can prevent the disease from progressing and hopefully prevent it from becoming a long-term problem. We don't know that this is syndrome yet. We don't know if this is going to be a long-term problem. Right now they're being checked and being treated for any airway problems.
Okay. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, thank you very much for being with us. New traces of anthrax have been found in mailrooms at 2 government agencies in our nation's capital, the State Department and the Supreme Court testing positive for anthrax. Meanwhile, Manhattan's largest mail distribution center is open, despite testing positive for anthrax last week. However, late this afternoon, a New York Postal Workers Union filed an environmental lawsuit seeking the closure of that facility for further testing. John Nolan is the Deputy Postmaster General of the U.S. Postal Service and joins me from Washington, D.C. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
The number of anthrax cases as a result of these attacks is growing. A lawsuit today because of the facility here in Manhattan that was remaining open during contamination. What is your reaction to that lawsuit?
Well, I think that much is the same as the National Union, frankly, that now's not the time for lawsuits. Now's the time to work together to find solutions, to make sure that people understand what the problems are, understand what we're doing to solve them, and work together to resolve all those problems. The key here is that we're very interested in employee safety and customer safety, and that's what comes first. So I think it's just a matter of understanding what it is we've already done and what the real facts are.
Are you confident that you have the facts? Are you confident that we know enough about this problem to say to the employees of the Postal Service that you know what's going on?
In the New York Morgan Station, we've taken over 160 samples and come up with 5 samples, 5 very small samples, in one isolated area on our 3rd floor of that 1.8 million square foot facility. We were advised to close off a very small area. We closed off a 100,000 foot area and have cleaned the machines. We've tested that facility up and down and provided antibiotics for our employees to make sure it's just doubly safe, that there's no problem. So we believe we're doing the right thing and more.
The right thing and more. At this point, as one looks at the evidence and the performance in this, as this country learns more and more about anthrax and these attacks, it is also pretty clear right now that we don't know nearly enough, any of us, about this, do we?
Well, we are learning, obviously, every day. The Postal Service, CDC, health authorities throughout the country are learning. But what we're trying to do is to take those precautionary steps beyond what we know now to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Well,
education,
recognizing the importance of the Postal Service, it's important to the lifeblood of this country's economy, its society. Isn't it perhaps reasonable here to say let's err on the side of caution, because you're dealing with 800,000 lives just in terms of postal employees, and say let's shut this down and be absolutely certain. Let's make a decision that we're going to put these irradiating machines in every postal facility and tackle the problem straight up, putting the safety of your employees paramount and the safety of the public paramount.
Well, the fact is that if you shut down a postal facility everywhere in the country and test today, does that make it safe tomorrow? What about the next day? I've used the line that if you had a traffic accident in Seattle, you wouldn't shut down the highway system in Florida. What you've got to do is
a traffic accident, Mr. Postmaster General. I mean, I think that analogy, they always limp. That one is certainly in the category of limping. Well, I can't see any parallel to a traffic accident in these anthrax attacks. Can you?
Well, no, but what I am saying is you attack the areas where you know you have a problem, and we're sampling 300 facilities around the country where we have no evidence of any anthrax to just spot check to make sure that we know what we're doing.
In terms of knowing what you're doing, what is happening with the Postal Service? As I said, and as we all know, it is critical to business in this country. What has been the impact on the mail load in all forms?
Well, mail volume is down during this period from what we would have normally expected, even in a period of economic downturn. So there's no doubt that catalog mailers, not necessarily because of the mail problem, but just because of the whole terrorist threat, are worried about the buying psychology and are holding back shipping out catalogs. So there has been an impact because of the terrorism that's occurred since September 11th, as well as the economic downturn. So it's been noticeable.
Okay. John Nolan, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. John Nolan, Deputy Postmaster General. Well, a little later here, unprecedented giving over the past 6 weeks has many smaller charities now starving for donations. We will take a look at who is being most affected as a result. But first, we're going to turn to Wall Street, where today there was a sharp sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrials falling 275 points, losing just about 3%, nearly 1.1 billion shares of volume today. The activity today remarkable also because this is the 72nd anniversary of the 1929 stock market crash. Christine Romans joins us now from the New York Stock Exchange, where it was, to say the least, a busy day. Christine?
It was, Lou, and in fact, you take a look at this, it was the worst one-day drop in this market since that terrible week of September 17th when the markets reopened. Analysts tonight are saying it's not any better what we heard from Mr. Ashcroft later today after the bell closed, and he worried about them opening bell tomorrow. Let's take a look at the Dow losers here today. Among them, Boeing, a big loser, down 10% in active after it lost out on a huge fighter jet contract. GM down about 5%. Also, you had United Technologies, Pratt & Whitney winning a $4 billion chunk of that big fighter jet contract. The stock had already priced it in. 3M down sharply here today as well. Folks nervous in general about a lot of these big names. This stock, though, still trading above pre-attack levels. Lou, overall, people are looking for tomorrow, watching the futures tonight, still looking weak.
Okay, Christine, thank you. Christine Romans from the New York